recording. And there we go. So we are recording. And again, feel free to use the chat box. I know you're all coming in muted. So feel free to use that chat box to share hellos, questions, comments, and thoughts as we go through. So as many of you know, today's session, hopefully you know, that today's session is our third in the series. And today we're going to talk about comprehension and fluency as kind of a segue building across from where we've been. So we have, I wanted to thank you for your continued interest. People have been wonderful and appreciative. I get lots of emails. I get lots of emails. Hopefully that's better, Aaron. That say, you know, that they're having, you know, that they're thankful that these sessions are available and the participation has been and feedback has been really great. Next Thursday is our final session. That one will be on writing, so it'll be a little bit different. The three we've had so far kind of go together. And just a reminder, everyone comes in on mute just because there's so many people and any little background noise kind of affects the whole group. And then we have any of your questions. Leanne Larson, our early childhood coordinator, early learning department coordinator is here, and she will, she did this job prior to my position, my joining as the elementary literacy specialist. So she is certainly a specialist, and she will be here to answer questions that come up while we're coming along through our presentation. So, just to kind of kick us off a little bit, we know that reading is kind of the key. We've talked a little bit, we've talked about phonological awareness, phonics, vocabulary, and spelling. So those are all things that are leading to the end game of our students being readers. And, you know, the purpose of reading and the gist of our goal of reading is so that we can create skills and abilities for our students in such a way that they can expand their own learning and their own topics and their own personal interests independently. They can develop their abilities to think creatively. They can further expand their vocabulary and their spelling ability, and to be increasingly successful in just their academic subjects, their content areas, and to learn from what they read. So that's, you know, we've had the first two sessions are kind of about those foundational things as the key pieces of instruction. And now we're really going to put it together and think more about our students as readers. So comprehension is crucial to reading. It's kind of the ultimate end game. And what happens with a lot of our students is that they may begin and they may come across as being successful readers. They might be able to you know, come along and be able to sort of go through kindergarten first and even second grade, you know, relying on pictures and teacher supports and all of those things. So the idea that they might be weak in comprehension really, for some students, can kind of be hidden until they get to maybe grades 3 and 4. So we know that some students have a hard time comprehending prior to that, but for some of them, they kind of get that kind of hidden, and we don't really notice it really come to the front until they get to about 3rd grade, when they become responsible for more independent reading and then learning from what they read and doing something with that learning. They really get into a situation where the teacher is doing less scaffolding and framing, and the older they get, the more that the weaknesses in comprehension begin to show up across all subjects. So it really becomes those basics and the introduction to those comprehension skills are really crucial right from the earliest grades, just so we can really prevent that from becoming a problem as they get older. So some indicators when we know what strong readers do. There's been a lot of research to really think about what a strong reader, what indicators we know of that strong readers bring to the forefront. Strong readers are able to predict what might happen next in a text. They're holding a story or an idea or a concept or content in their head, and they're making some predictions that are going to connect to that, that are going to make sense. So they're thinking, they're holding information, and they're thinking ahead. They're able to self-monitoring for their own understanding. When you read a story, or you read a news article or a magazine article, if you didn't understand as an adult reader, as a proficient reader, you are able to think, oh, I didn't really understand that. And you know that you can look for some other information, or you know that you can reread it, or you can have a conversation. And those are things that you do as a proficient reader that strong readers do. Even our strong students, that they know when something doesn't make sense. Whereas our students who struggle a little bit more aren't always self-monitoring. They also are kind of self-questioning as they go through. They're thinking about the main idea or the message, the plot, and all of those things, and they're building a picture of that as they go through. When there are parts of a text, maybe the vocabulary words or the concept or the structure is unclear, they can clarify that. They can use strategies to clarify those things. And then they can use a lot of their prior knowledge. We talked a lot about vocabulary and its importance in building prior knowledge. And so they can do that and use all of those experiences and prior knowledge to make meaning for themselves. So a place that places that our weaker readers struggle is really that lack of organization. They struggle to sort out their reading strategies and know what to use when and which text to use them on. They don't always have a clear purpose for their reading. We know that different types of text, the way you're going to read a recipe is going to be completely different than the way you're going to read a newspaper article versus the way you're going to read a science textbook or the way you're going to read a fictional story for enjoyment. And some of our struggling readers, they aren't able to figure out that approach or strategies or purpose for reading when the type of text change. Another cause of that we see in a lot of our weaker readers is that their background knowledge is weak. They lack that strong background knowledge and vocabulary to really make those authentic connections. They don't have that basis from which to rely on, or that foundation from which to rely on. And so that comes to the front when they just aren't able to make those connections. And so the background knowledge, same thing is true with vocabulary. When their vocabulary is weak, it really hinders their ability to deeply comprehend, because they don't have, they're having a hard time figuring out. A lot of times we think of the author's word choice, and if their vocabulary is not strong, then they may not understand what the author means when they talk about word choice. When we talked about vocabulary last time, we talked about words like sputter and hunch and some words like that. We talked about barricade and some of those things. So when the author uses those words, they might not seem complicated to us, but if you're a student who doesn't have that understanding, they become real barriers to their comprehension. And then the other thing that happens is, because for our weaker readers, is because it's such a struggle and it's so difficult across time, they also lose interest because it's hard. They lack self-confidence. They get frustrated, and so they're really not engaged, and it's very hard. I hear people say a lot, it's hard to find things that keep them interested or keep their interest. So those are all things that we see with our struggling readers. So when we think about the definition of comprehension, if you will, it really is the idea of thinking guided by print. So the print is directing the way a student is thinking, and it's really having them make meaning of what they're viewing and what they've read or what they've heard. So it's kind of that understanding of what's done outright and clearly right there. You can point to it in the text, but also combining that with what's implied, by the author, and really, thinking about all of those things as you go through. And it really becomes kind of a combination of a lot of pieces that we expect our students to put together. The text has a structure. We've talked about vocabulary. Sometimes it's just the style of that. Then the reader also has to be decoding and bringing their own knowledge and their background and their use of strategies. And then they have to rely on, their background, their prior knowledge and all those things. And then they have to combine all of those pieces into making meaning and really guiding their thinking around all of those pieces. So you can see where the things that we've talked about before for phonics and the foundational skills and structures and vocabulary become so crucial to make those other pieces more approachable and manageable for our students. So when we are thinking about our comprehension, our instruction for reading comprehension, we really want to make sure that we don't lose sight of those foundational skills that we've talked about. Keep those in mind and be monitoring for them as you see students and you engage in those conversations that you have that opportunity to do. You really, by using your think alouds and engaging in the conversation that you have such opportunities to do in your small groups or one-on-one time with students, you really, be thinking about those other skills and monitoring for when those are getting in the way of their making meaning of the text and thinking about the text. And then keep in mind that their language, their oral language and their listening are also foundational skills. For some of our readers who the printed skills of phonics and vocabulary and spelling, when those things are not as easy for them, there's still the importance of that practice to be able to comprehend and have authentic, deep oral conversations about what they hear. And that can happen right from having engaging text right from the time that they're in pre-K and kindergarten. And you can have that opportunity to really model and practice that rich language and help them really think about how they can make meaning and be thinking about text even before they're able to access it independently when they're reading it to themselves. So there are some kind of overall components that we think about when we think about instruction for reading comprehension. It's very important to think of how we can really actively engage our students and how you can think about things that you can do that will really engage them, because many of you as ed techs are working with students who reading this is not an enjoyable part of their day. When people fill out the surveys and I look back through them, that's a lot of things there. How can I do this with a student who doesn't enjoy it, or how can I engage an older student who is reading at a lower level, so they are trying to avoid it. So really engaging them by varying the activities and the text and the supports that you offer to them are really going to be crucial there to really keep their engagement. And again, you think about things that are really high interest for them. Choice of text. A lot of times we might think, that concept or that text is just really too hard. A student, might bring you a book and say, I'd really like to read more about, dinosaurs. A gentleman that we've worked with who actually works for Exile gave the example of his 5-year-old who was really not a fluent reader or, able to read. He was only 5. And he really wanted to read books about dinosaurs. And he said, he knew what he was reading was way too difficult for him, but the child was very motivated, and they did things like reading it together and all of those things. And a lot of times, the student interest would really hinge on keeping them motivated. And you can offer them support that might make those things more accessible to them. your read alouds, offering, some audio books or media supports that are really going to, or other books about the same topic that might lead to something, really will help them do that. And then having those kind of deep conversations. We're going to talk a little bit about the comprehension strategies as we move through. So it's important to think about teaching the strategies of comprehension and give students lots of time to practice those things in real text and be monitoring for their understanding by having those rich conversations and giving them time to reflect and explain their thinking to you and work through thinking together. You might even have to break it into smaller parts so that they really are showing you, their understanding as they move through. So when we talk about reading comprehension, we talk about two things. We talk about skills and we talk about strategies. So skills are the things that oftentimes students are going to show you maybe on a worksheet. They're going to show you a right and a wrong answer, kind of usually after a student is done reading a passage or a text, and it's going to tell you how well they comprehended that particular text. But it isn't necessarily going to carry over. So research really is showing us that it's really important to think about teaching reading comprehension in terms of teaching reading strategies and comprehension strategies, because they really focus on the student's thinking. You practice them before they read, while they're reading, and after they're reading, and they really can be carried across to really increase the understanding of any text that they read. So when we look at, kind of high evidence base, from research, it really shows us that teaching students strategies of comprehension is really much more effective for them. So, our end goal, what you really want to do is really build students who are thinking, like we said, thinking about the print and actively engaged and enjoying it. So these strategies might be a stronger way, research shows, of doing that. So Tim Shanahan talks about kind of teaching intentional, he calls them intentional mental actions that really help them practice and really help them refine their skills. So you can see that they're listed here, and we're going to kind of go through each of those just so you have a little bit of an idea what each of these might look like across any text that a student might encounter. So summarizing, this is a technique or a strategy where you're going to help the students identify what's important in the text. And when you start this, it's going to be really important to really break it down and think about just retelling short parts of the text. Sometimes our weaker readers, it's very difficult for them to hold an entire text or a long passage in their head and retell it. So it might be something that you need to break down into smaller parts. And it's going to have to be, really helping students by having conversations with them and engaging with them, identify the crucial details or the unnecessary information in a text. Some of our readers who really struggle with comprehension, they might retell you every single thing that happened in the book. A lot of times when I would work with a younger reader and we would do an assessment, you'd read maybe a 4 or 5 page. Some of the assessment books are, they have the pictures and they go through, like if you're familiar with a DRA, and they would want to go right through, and they would often use the pictures and they would just retell you every single thing. So that practice of narrowing short parts and just basing it on crucial details, and then deciding what's irrelevant to the whole text. Then focusing on some key words and phrases that are kind of meaningful to that summary. One of the hardest things that our students have when they're writing, when it comes to writing about how they comprehend the text and showing their comprehension, is that idea of using evidence from the text. A lot of our students, because they haven't just kind of narrowed to keywords or phrases, think that using evidence from the text means to copy copious amounts of the text to show. So it's really about kind of that strategy of summarizing the text and narrowing it to just those key ideas and details. And you know, having those conversations and practicing that, maybe even recording what they're telling you, and keeping it short, in short parts, is a great way to practice that strategy of summarizing. The next strategy we're going to talk about is questioning. You can see, so this is a time when students are generating the questions. So they're thinking about some questions that they might think of before they start to read. So, you know, if they're reading a book that might be about baseball, they might be generating some questions, and you might help them generate, because again, this is where we're teaching these strategies. So you might help them generate some questions to help them set that purpose. Remember, one of the things we said is that our weaker readers struggle with a purpose for reading. So having time to generate some questions of things that they think might be answered in the text, or activate some background knowledge. If it's a story about baseball, you know, will there be information about, you know, will there be information about the teams? Will there be information about positions? You know, what kinds of things might they be thinking about that they can be kind of seeking out answers to as they go through the text. And they can continue that while they're reading. It's important to teach them about learning to ask themselves questions that confirm or you know, go against what they were thinking and the points that they were looking for through the text. And then again, at the end, referring back to those questions and having some real deep, authentic conversations with you to kind of make some confirmations or some times where their thinking didn't match what the text showed them. So it's a great opportunity, again, to really dig into some conversations or some short pieces of writing that you can co-write, where students can practice generating the questions and then confirming them or refuting them while they're within the context of what they're reading. So another structure or another strategy for students while they're reading is story mapping. And these are just a couple, there are many, many sample templates if you look at them. The purpose of a story map is really to help students kind of figure out the structure of a story and how a story works. It's very difficult for a student to internalize and comprehend what a story is about, or the impact of a story, if the setting is a key structure of the story, and that the story wouldn't have made a lot of sense in a different setting if they don't understand what the setting is and have a prior knowledge of the setting, then probably that wouldn't make a lot of sense. So those are some things that they might have to do. Another struggle that comes up with comprehension is if, they don't understand, once an author gets writing in a story, a lot of times what happens is they switch to pronouns. And so students sometimes lose track of who the characters are referring to, because they're really struggling to know when the author keeps saying, she, or he, they've lost track. If you have a conversation with a student about, what's happening to a character, when the author starts using less and less of the character's name, which they don't refer to the character by the name of the character every single time. When you're reading Charlotte's Web, it's important to think, obviously, what are the characteristics of a farm? If you're thinking about Templeton and how he comes along and all of those things. So the setting of a farm, knowing that is important, but also knowing the characters. When that story moves along and they're talking about he being Wilbur and she being Charlotte, it's important for them to be able to identify and follow along with those pronouns and not lose track of that. So story maps really help a student kind of sort out structure and keep track of it for themselves. So they can really keep these, and they exist in all different formats. Some are just about characters. The two here, you can see this is kind of character setting, and then just kind of basic beginning, middle, and end, which may help them focus. And the other on the right is again, characters and some actions, and then some, an outcome and a problem. But, it's kind of that idea that it gives the students a kind of a graphic organizer of something that's going to make that learning a little bit more clear and in front of them. So the next strategy is what we talked about in the beginning of students having a hard time doing kind of that self-monitoring. Strong readers do it, but our struggling readers, they're not strong at monitoring their own thinking and understanding. And if the idea of comprehension is to be thinking about print, then it's really important to help students monitor their own thinking. So it's important to help them, again, in small pieces of text when you're first working on this as a strategy, to really help them identify and check their own pieces along the way of identifying when there's something that they don't understand. And then, helping them kind of figure out some ideas of how they might fix it up or what they might do. Because if you just say to them, did you understand that section? Generally speaking, they're going to just say to you, yeah, I got it. So, teaching them to really self-monitor. What part might you reread? Where might you go to seek out some other information? If there's a concept that's not clear, where else could you go to do that? What other background information could you present to the students? If you're reading a book about, if you're reading a book about the ocean or whales, might you use a short YouTube video to kind of get them to understand whales? When I used to teach reading recovery, we had a number of books about penguins, which was not a background. A lot of students in Maine don't have a lot of knowledge about penguins. We also had a lot of books for some reason about hippopotamuses. And so a lot of times we would watch, National Geographic has great little, nonfiction videos about those animals. And sometimes, when it talked about, the mother calling out to her baby, just the idea that they could hear what sound that those animals made sometimes really gave them some connections and helped them make those connections. So giving them, showing them, like sometimes I might not know what that's about, but I might look for more information, and really teaching them to advocate for themselves and monitoring for that. And then, like I said, the fix-up strategy, again, is, looking at the features of the text, like we talked about in the story maps. Are there features? Are there settings? Are there different things? If it's nonfiction, are there bold words? Are there vocabulary words? Are there features in there that would help clarify that for them? The next strategy that they talk about is question answering. So one strategy is that they determine their own questions and they look at them. And then another type is, again, you're thinking maybe of some questions that are going to help them be thinkers. So you're going to make those questions. It doesn't always have to be in writing. Those questions can be in writing. They can be in conversation. But you're really choosing some questions that help students become active thinkers about what they're reading. So there are kind of, reading rockets kind of refers to kind of 4 just general questions. So the first one I said earlier, we were talking about things that you can point to right there. So those are those kind of right there questions. So if you're reading Frog and Toad, who's Frog's best friend? Toad. You can see it. They say Frog's best friend is Toad. So those are those kind of right there answers. Sometimes you might pose some think and search questions. So those are still thinking about facts and recall, but they're not actually going to be printed right in the text. They're going to take a little bit more thought. So again, if you're thinking about Frog and Toad, you might ask, why was Frog sad? What were his reasons? These start to give you a good opportunity to think of evidence from the text. How could you tell he was sad? How did you get to that? That he was sad because Toad was leaving. How could you tell that? What was in there that told you that? The next type that they refer to are author and you questions. So this is where they have to start bringing in their prior knowledge and kind of their understanding. So a lot of these start with how do you think or what do you think? And so, again, if we're thinking along the lines of Frog and Toad, how do you think Frog felt when he found Toad? Because he was gone. And, a student might say, I think. A lot of times their answers start with I think, because remember, we're talking about building strategies and developing strategies and not having right and wrong and developing their thinking. So, I think that this happens, and they can make some connections. Has anybody ever, have you ever had someone go away, and how did you feel compared to how Frog might have felt? And then the last questions, the section that they talk about is a little bit about, on your own. Like, what kinds of questions are just based on that? So those a lot of times are the follow-up questions to author and you. The character felt this way. How might you have felt? Or has this ever happened to you? And really making those scaffolding a way for them to make those connections. So the next strategy that we talk about, that Shanahan talks about, is graphic organizers. Again, another strategy for students. And these focus a little bit more on a certain feature of the text, a real ability to really do, sometimes they're called webs or charts. You can use Venn diagrams, but they're really, really specific to a structure. So you can see that there's a sequencing map, which might help them learn to summarize. First this happened, next, and then finally. That's that kind of a common structure to get them thinking through and across the text. And then we talked a little bit about them keeping track of characters. So you can see the one on the right is a way for them to kind of sort out characters. What are some things that this character did? What were some things that they thought about? What were some things that may have helped them, do that? So you might make multiple entries about one character, or you might, really dig into multiple characters. But graphic organizers really help do that. It gives students a chance to compare and contrast. They might compare two books, or they might compare, by the same author or on the same topic, and how that might look. And it really gives them an opportunity to focus and have those features right in front of them. And then another strategy, mental imagery. Really, it's a nice way to help students kind of make a picture in their mind. Sometimes they refer to them as thinking about a little movie in your mind. Be thinking about descriptive. One activity that's fun with a couple students, or with even you and one student or a small group, is to find a particularly descriptive story. Ask students, especially a picture book, but not showing them the pictures, and really think about, ask them, stop partway through. What are you thinking What are you thinking about this right now? Have them share, and then compare again. That's not how I thought of it, or that's not how I thought about it. And then ask them to adjust that mental image as they go along. As they use their words to describe what that mental image might be, you could ask, if you're just you and another child, you could show them the pictures as they went along, or you could ask them to make some predictions. And if you're working with a couple of students, they might share their own descriptions of what they see and how they envision something. A lot of times, if you're doing a read aloud of a chapter book, there might not be pictures, and that becomes increasingly difficult. But having them practice and thinking about what that is, so much of what our kids see today is right in front of them on screens where they have constant support visually. And so sometimes they just might need some practice learning how to kind of visualize what it might look like and kind of make a picture to help them think about what's happening in that print. Now, we've talked a lot about prior knowledge with vocabulary. Prior knowledge is really that ability for a student to use all of their experience, their vocabulary, and really access their own thinking and bring their own life experiences to what's in front of them in that written word. You know, sometimes we call it kind of thinking about thinking, and you know, they might need some practice and help in scaffolding. You know, oh, I just don't understand what this is. How could I help that? How could I learn more about that? And again, it really activates them, and they can kind of have those if-then conversations and moments so that they can activate those prior knowledge. And you've already been doing that when you're working on that rich vocabulary with your students. So moving along to think about fluency. So there's lots of definitions about fluency. Sometimes when you go back and they first were conversations about fluency, it talked about just how quickly students read. I know I would sit with kids years ago and they would just read right along, and you know, it was about just trying to race to the end of that. So as we've moved through and thought more and more about fluency and what it is, it's really about a reasonably accurate reading. So there has the accuracy at an appropriate rate and with suitable expression that's going to lead to comprehension and that interest in reading. So it's not just about reading quickly and getting to the end of it. It is about, you know, there's obviously a certain level of accuracy. There are different scales that, you know, decide how accurate a student has to be in word rate. But some of that adjusts a little bit depending on what it is that they're reading. You're certainly going to want a student, their accuracy might be a little less on point if they're doing a reader's theater and they're a very energetic, expressive student. You might find that they're going to put a lot of their own expression in there, and they might throw in some extra words, and their accuracy might go down, but their accuracy, their fluency, their pace and rate might be a little bit lower, but their accuracy might need to be a little bit higher on if they're reading a science textbook. So you're going to have to make some teaching decisions and some educational, professional decisions on where accuracy is more important. But you're going to want to think: are they being an efficient reader? Are they using, an appropriate accuracy, and is it leading towards being able to think about that print within there? So, I mean, the purpose, our ultimate purpose in fluency, is that it is just necessary for comprehension. If you just sit and really ponder, and you have to spend too much energy on decoding word by word, and it really is slowing down the reader, there's definitely going to be hindrances on being able to think about what they're print, because all that energy is really going to be spent in doing all those things. So that's where things like high frequency words and vocabulary and background knowledge are all really going to fall into place, because we really want to make sure that our students are going to be able to bring all of these pieces that they've done together and do them in the most efficient way possible. So when we think about building fluency, we think about kind of a few different strategies again. Don't abandon that foundational instruction. Certainly it's going to look different. Some questions that came up in our other sessions in the follow-up, what does this look like as I move towards a 5th and 6th grader or a 3rd and 4th grader? You don't want to abandon it, but it's also not going to look the same. It's going to be within the context of what's happening. We talked a little bit about, word study and strategies. So you're going to be thinking about these things within the context of what they're reading and what they're writing so that you're giving authentic practice for the students, but you're going to still want to keep those foundational pieces in place, because the students are going to continue to rely on those as to not be roadblocks for being fluent. So you're going to want to give students a lot of practice. You're going to want to give them lots of opportunities to read and reread text. If your students are anything like the students I've worked with, sometimes getting students to reread text is somewhat of a challenge. A lot of times, some of our students, especially the ones who enjoy reading and listening to stories the least, are the ones who will say, I've already read that, or I've already heard that. So you might have to mix up a little bit how they do that. You might want to think about reading some other, vary what they're reading, readers' theaters, used phrases, things that we say a lot, that come up a lot in text, poems, nursery rhymes, some of them are context song lyrics. A lot of our students, they can sing every word in a song. You're going to have to be a little careful with those song lyrics because sometimes they mean other things, but they can sing every word in a song they hear on the radio. But, give them, being able to read those brings it back. And then again, with familiar passages. So, but think about kind of varying that, mixing it up a little bit when they're doing that, kind of give them a different purpose for it. Maybe read it with a partner. Change who your reading audience might be. Can you sing it? Can you record it as a radio broadcast? Can you whisper it? As you do those things, you might want to avoid, being monitored that things don't get silly, so that you don't lose, the fluency practice. But it's definitely, giving them purpose and giving them kind of motivation to read it again, and practice for that, and giving them, that as a basis. Here's, we're going to read this again, and giving them, the more success they feel, the more they'll be able to stick with that. So some other ways to work on building fluency, we'll go back to thinking about our vocabulary instruction. Really think about, in the context of their reading, thinking about those author and you questions that we talked about, or author and me. Why did the author, a lot of times you can get a lot of insight into the students thinking about print. If you're thinking about them explaining and having conversation about why a certain vocabulary word was used, why did the author choose that, and really expanding your vocabulary and their vocabulary conversations about, their words and how they can build meaning and what might come as they go through, as they go through a text. And then again, thinking about some other media and models that really allow students to know what fluent reading sounds like. I had a student years ago who I recorded and played back for him. And he said to me, "Who is that?" And because I played it back for him a couple days later. And it was one of the things that we did with purpose, and because he had read a story and he'd reread it, and so I recorded him the first day and he read it, and then he would say to me quite often that he wanted to hear it again. He was young, he was in first grade, but the first day he listened to the original first read of it, he didn't recognize himself as having read it. So it really, he didn't enjoy listening to his own reading. So it was just kind of his own reaction to it was kind of funny. But they need, these all of our kids need practice with hearing what fluent reading sounds like. You might access an audio book or a video of a book being read aloud, and having the students read along with it, so that they're having the same, that practice, having the book in front of them and reading along with somebody else. They might listen to it first and then read along with it afterwards to kind of have that scaffold and support. There are, most books now you can find at least a passage of them read online, especially in this current time with remote learning. I think that it's pretty rare that I don't look up on YouTube an author, an author or a person reading a book and not find it there. So there's lots of options there. And then there are a lot of places for for that to be available. Another thing that you can do is that shared reading, where you're reading it together. You know, you're both reading along, or the teacher is sharing a part of it and you're interacting while you're reading. Echo reading, you know, reading it and having the students echo. Choral reading, so that more than one voice is reading together. Those are things they're hearing and reading. Sometimes when you're first doing that, some of your students might listen through. You might read it, you know, more than one time, even at a certain setting, because some of your students, you know, you might notice and just take note. You know, you might have some students who are just listening that first time when you're in a whole class. They certainly would, you know, might be the ones that aren't doing it with you. I mean, if you're reading a passage, a poem, or something that you have up in front and you're modeling it, a lot of times they're gonna spend, especially since most of them probably enjoy listening to you read it more anyway, they're gonna be listening to your intonation and your expression and all of those things. But with some repeated readings and some scaffolds where they start feeling comfortable, they're gonna be more and more engaged and participating in that process. So it's really going to help them do that and really kind of help their fluency and comprehension build together. So some resources that are available. We've talked about a number of these. We've referred a number of times to the Florida Research Center for Reading Research. They have, again, all the way they're divided into kind of grade spans, K1, K2, 2, 3. They have them identified, I think, as centers, but they're certainly things that are able to be used in one-on-one or small group interventions to work together. And then an intervention central, excuse me, has a section there called academic interventions, and you can kind of sort that by, you know, phonetics or you know, or comprehension or fluency activities, and you can kind of narrow and find things in there that might help you to find activities to do in a small group. If you're you know, organizing or setting up centers or one-on-one. I know a lot of the questions that have come back from the survey, a lot of those questions center on, you know, how might that look for a student who I'm supporting in the classroom, or I'm supporting and, you know, after the classroom. Some other questions come up with, you know, how might I reteach these things? And it really comes down to, you know, being able to communicate with the classroom teachers and being able to know what things can you scaffold, what kind of, you know, deep conversations can you have about what topics, because you are really in a situation where you have the ability to build the students' knowledge that they can bring back and you know, be able to better access what's happening within their classroom instruction and really scaffold that. So I can see that. You can see that Leanne has answered a number of questions. And there are, as she's gone through those questions, again, you'll have an opportunity when you fill out the survey and the bit.ly link to you know, pose more questions. I'm working on kind of a Q&A document to go through those so that I can send it out kind of to everyone, like I've sent out the certificates and the slides. So those, you know, those are something that to have for folks, to be available for folks. And then this is, and I want to make sure I leave this slide up here plenty long for people. So you can see that there is the QR code on there, and there's the bit.ly link. So you'll notice the AGOK are all capital, and just the OB are lowercase. I did have a few, I can put the link in the chat room. At least I think I can. Oh, I had to go over here to do it though. Oh, this happened to me last time too. I got to get out of it first. There we go. And remember to, when you put this in your own, a couple people have had issues cutting and pasting this into their browser. So a lot of people have found that it hasn't worked on very well on Explorer, but for some reason it worked much better on Chrome. I don't know why. I know you have to be really specific with the case, but you do want to make that larger too, in case anybody is using their, in case anybody is using the QR code. But so you're going to want to, you're going to want to do that so that you can make sure that you have the right case there. And it does seem to work better if you paste it into your browser on Chrome as opposed to Internet Explorer. All right, let's see. Verifying this link, we're working on it. Let's see what happens. I just clicked on it. Huh. It worked on this one, but maybe because I'm already in Microsoft. Huh. All right, let me see if I can find the everybody's getting the Microsoft notice. Let me see. So I'm going to go to the forms where I made it. And problem solve this. I'm going to leave the recording on in case somebody watches it and they are also stuck. All right, so I am on forms and I want to share it. And oh, that's why, because, all right, hold on, let me see. If you try it, so can you try it again? Because I just had to change it. It was set to only people in my organization can respond, but I'm not sure when it changed it, if it changed the link. Can somebody try it again and see if it works? Ah, yay! Technology problem solving. Okay. For some reason, we have a new setting and or a new way to collect information. So I had it so that only people from in the organization could respond. Oh, and I will post it again. I apologize, but at least it works. Oops. All right, I'm gonna cut and paste this, copy this again. Because I did get that setting changed. Thank you for, I'm glad people tried it while we were here. So that we could see. All right, so if folks don't have any additional questions, if it doesn't work for you, you can shoot me an email. It seems to be working for folks now. Thank you very much for coming. I think we're pretty close to on time, 2:57. I am gonna stop recording before